Christmas Eve, 1879. Wyoming had swallowed up in a blinding white storm. A snowstorm so fierce that even the toughest cattle could barely be seen in the swirling winds. James Blackwood, a cattle baron with vast land and a deep fortune, rode through the storm, his face grim as he scanned the blizzard. He was searching for lost cattle, a vital task that could cost him more than just money. His livelihood depended on it. But beneath his hardened exterior and wealth lay a loneliness that he couldn't escape, especially during Christmas. This season, like all others, would pass in silence, a reminder of what he'd lost long ago. The wind howled as he rode deeper into the storm, his horse struggling against the icy gusts. Just as he was beginning to question if he'd ever find the lost herd, a dark shape appeared in the snow. At first, he thought it was a tree or rock, but as he neared, he realized it was a body, a woman, collapsed and nearly frozen to death. Her clothes were torn, and her body was so pale it was almost indistinguishable from the snow beneath her. His heart clenched in an unfamiliar way. She was clinging to something, an old, weathered photograph held tightly in her frozen hands. Without hesitation, James dismounted and rushed to her side. She barely stirred as he lifted her into his arms, her skin ice-cold to the touch. Her face was deathly pale, lips blue from the biting cold. He couldn't leave her out here. She was too young to die in this storm. He wrapped his coat around her and gently lifted her onto his horse, holding her tightly as he kicked the horse into motion. His mind raced. Who was she? Why was she out here alone? Her breath came in shallow, chattering gasps, but she muttered something barely audible above the wind. "Please don't send me back. He'll kill me. Promise, Mama." Her words were barely more than a whisper, but James heard them clearly. He didn't know who he was, but whoever it was had driven this young woman to flee in such dangerous conditions. James's stomach tightened with a feeling he couldn't place, something deep inside telling him that he had to save her. The storm only worsened as James pushed his horse harder, his eyes scanning the snow-covered path, barely able to see in front of him. The winds screamed like wolves, and the snow fell harder, biting into his face and hands. His thoughts flickered back to the herd. He had to choose. The cattle were worth a fortune, but this girl in his arms, so fragile, so close to death, was worth more. Through the blinding snow, the distant glow of Blackwood Ranch's lights finally appeared. He spurred his horse toward them, determined to get her inside, where she would be warm. It wasn't long before they reached the ranch's front steps, and his staff, already shocked by his arrival, rushed to help. They saw the girl and knew something was terribly wrong. Inside, the fire blazed in the hearth as James carried her into the guest room. Mrs. Chun, the housekeeper, took immediate charge. "She needs warmth." "We can't wait for the doctor," she said firmly, her voice filled with urgency. James nodded, his mind racing. He couldn't even imagine what had happened to this girl, but he knew she needed help, fast. As Mrs. Chun undressed Emma, she gasped when she saw the marks on her body. The bruises were vivid, in different stages of healing, like she had been beaten before. But it was the burn mark on her shoulder that caught her attention, a fresh cigar burn. James's gut tightened. This girl hadn't just been abandoned in a snowstorm. She had been abused. He stared helplessly as Mrs. Chun worked to warm her up. Emma's small hands, frozen and swollen, still gripped the photograph. It was only when Mrs. Chun gently pried it from her fingers that they saw what it was. A picture of a woman and a small child. Emma's mother and little sister, perhaps. James's eyes scanned the room, his heart heavy. He couldn't ignore it. The sense that this girl, this broken soul, was somehow meant to be here. And a look of fear in her eyes when she saw him only deepened the mystery. When Emma's eyes fluttered open, her gaze locked onto James. Her expression twisted into terror as she gasped, "Please, don't tell him where I am." James stepped back, stunned. "You're safe here," he said softly, though he wasn't sure who she was afraid of. But before he could say anything else, Mrs. Chun came back with a quiet, serious tone. "She's running from a husband, Mr. Blackwood." James's jaw tightened. He had heard rumors of men like this, men who thought they owned their wives. And whoever this Thomas Garrett was, James was going to make sure he never found her here. The storm outside raged on, but inside the ranch, the warmth of the fire and the quiet tension between them was palpable. Emma was safe for the moment, but she was far from free. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new decisions. But for now, all James could do was watch over her as she fell into a fitful sleep, haunted by her nightmares. And somewhere deep inside, he knew that no matter what happened, he'd never be the same again. Emma woke to warmth for the first time in years. The fire crackled softly, and the scent of something fresh and comforting filled the air. She blinked, confused, as the flickering light from the hearth danced across the unfamiliar room. Her heart raced as she sat up quickly, her body trembling in the soft bed. The terror came rushing back. She wasn't safe yet. She tried to push herself off the bed, but her limbs felt weak, the exhaustion too great. Panic surged as she staggered to the door. But before she could make it, the door opened. The tall, broad-shouldered man from the night before stepped inside, holding a tray of food. He was calm, his demeanor steady as he placed the tray on the table beside her. "Please don't send me away," Emma whispered, her voice trembling. "I can't pay you. I have nothing left. Just let me go before he finds me." James Blackwood, with his rugged features and piercing gaze, regarded her silently for a moment, his expression unreadable. "You're safe here. No one's sending you anywhere," he said in a low, steady voice that sent a ripple of comfort through her. She looked at him, still trembling, but something in his voice made her pause. Slowly, her shoulders sagged with the weight of her relief. She sat back down on the bed, feeling the rawness of the moment. Emma's breath came in shaky gasps as she finally spoke, her voice hoarse. "My name is Emma. I ran from him. Thomas. He hurt me. He's been hurting me for months. He promised my mama he'd take care of me, but he became something else." Tears welled in her eyes as she clutched the blanket in her hands, her voice breaking. "I don't know what to do anymore." James listened quietly, his face unreadable as she poured out fragments of her life. He could hear the fear, the pain, the years of isolation in her voice, but there was also something in her eyes, resilience. He'd seen enough in his life to recognize it. "You're under my protection now," he said simply, his words firm, cutting through the chaos of her thoughts. "You're safe here." The warmth of the room, the kindness in his words, was like a balm to the raw, broken parts of her. She didn't trust easily, but something about the way he spoke, the way he didn't pity her, made her feel like maybe, just maybe, she could rest here. As the hours passed, Emma wandered through the grand house, the richness of it almost overwhelming. It was decorated for Christmas, but the beauty of the place didn't comfort her. It felt too quiet, too empty, like it was all just a shell. She walked into the kitchen where Mrs. Chun, the housekeeper, was humming as she prepared food. She was warm, her round face smiling kindly as she greeted Emma. "You're awake, dear," Mrs. Chun said, her hands never stopping their work. "How are you feeling?" Emma, still feeling like a ghost in this strange place, nodded slowly. "Better, thank you." Mrs. Chun looked at her with a knowing gaze. "You're welcome, miss. The master is kind, but not everyone would show that to a stranger, especially one in your state." Emma flinched at the words, realizing just how much of her past had been written on her skin. The marks, the bruises, the memories that no one could see but her. She didn't want to burden anyone with it. "I'm used to doing things on my own," Emma said quietly, trying to force herself to stand straighter. "I don't want to be a burden." Mrs. Chun gave her a soft, understanding smile. "No one is a burden here. We all have our parts to play. Yours is to heal. And for now, that's enough." There was a gentleness to the older woman that made Emma's chest ache. She had never known this kind of kindness. She had always been the one giving, the one taking care of others. But here, in this place, it felt like she could be taken care of. It felt wrong, like she didn't deserve it, but also felt like the first glimmer of hope she had seen in years. As she helped Mrs. Chun prepare a meal, Emma found herself talking more freely than she had in ages. She had never known such warmth, even in the kitchen of her own home growing up. The conversation flowed easily, a soft, comforting rhythm that eased the tension in her shoulders. It was then she realized this house was full of life, even if it didn't always feel like it. As they set the table, James appeared in the doorway. His presence was imposing, but there was a quiet softness to him now, something Emma hadn't noticed the night before. He watched her, something in his eyes that she couldn't quite understand. She looked down at the table, suddenly nervous. "It's not much," she muttered, but Mrs. Chun just laughed. "It's more than enough, dear. We eat with what we have." As they sat together for the meal, Emma asked hesitantly, "Where's your family, Mr. Blackwood? Are they coming for Christmas?" James's expression faltered for a brief moment before he responded. "They're gone," he said quietly. "A fire, 15 years ago. I've built this ranch on my own, but it's never been the same. I don't have anyone to celebrate with anymore." Emma's heart ached at the emptiness in his voice. She wasn't the only one with a past full of ghosts. She could hear the sorrow in his words, something she had come to recognize too well. After a long pause, James added, "I've learned money attracts the wrong kind of attention. I'd rather be alone than surrounded by people who only want what I have." Emma felt the sting of his words deep in her chest. She didn't know what it was, but something about this man, his loneliness, his kindness, made her want to stay. They shared stories over dinner, and for the first time in ages, Emma felt like she wasn't alone in the world. She felt seen. "I never knew what it was to be loved," she admitted quietly. "I thought I did, but then it all changed." She paused, wiping a tear from her cheek. "I just wanted to be free." James didn't say anything for a long while. Then, his voice low, he spoke. "Freedom doesn't come without a price, Miss Emma, but it's a price worth paying." As she looked at him, she felt something shift between them, something unspoken but strong. Just as Emma was about to speak again, a sound caught her attention, the sound of horses approaching. She froze, her heart leaping into her throat. James turned to the window, his face darkening. Emma's breath caught in her throat as she heard a distant voice call out, "James Blackwood, I'm looking for my wife." The harsh creak of the door opening cut through the heavy silence of Blackwood Ranch, and James Blackwood's gaze hardened as three figures dismounted and trudged through the snow toward him. The lead figure, a tall, cold-eyed man with dark, meticulously groomed hair, strode forward. Thomas Garrett, the man Emma had fled. Behind him, a deputy marshal and a hired gun flanked him, both dressed in dark, heavy coats. They looked like trouble, but it was Thomas who had the authority and the power to back up his threats. James's eyes narrowed as he met Garrett's gaze. Garrett, false charm plastered on his face, stepped forward with a slight bow, his words smooth but calculated. "Mr. Blackwood," he said, his voice slick, "I'm looking for my wife, Miss Emma. She's unwell, confused, and ran off in a state of distress. I'm very concerned for her safety." He flashed a marriage certificate as if it was proof enough of his right to claim her. "I'm a respected merchant in Cheyenne. I'm sure you understand the concern of a husband for his wife's well-being." James studied the document with disinterest, his expression unchanging. "I haven't seen any woman matching that description," he replied, his voice calm but firm. Thomas's mask slipped just for a moment, the warmth in his eyes fading as his jaw tightened. He had clearly expected a different reception. "I have witnesses who saw her board the train here," Thomas added, his voice taking on a more forceful edge. James didn't flinch. "And I'm telling you that I haven't seen her," he repeated, his voice turning colder. Garrett's smooth exterior cracked slightly as his eyes flashed with anger. "This isn't some mere misunderstanding, Blackwood. She's my property, and I'll have her back. The law says so." James's lips curled into a thin smile, his eyes hardening. "A wife is not property, Garrett," he shot back, his voice low but filled with conviction. At this, the hired gun shifted slightly, his hand brushing the hilt of his weapon. It was a subtle move, but James caught it immediately. He wasn't here just to talk. The tension in the air grew thick, and James stood tall, his posture unyielding. "I'm not handing over a woman who's clearly running from something," he said, his voice unwavering. Garrett's false charm was gone now, replaced with an icy edge. "You don't understand, Blackwood," he spat, his eyes burning with anger. "She's mine. You don't get to decide what happens to her. I'll take whatever legal steps I need to make sure she's returned to me." The deputy marshal looked between the two men, torn, clearly aware of the power struggle unfolding before him. Thomas wasn't going to back down, and neither was James. The cold silence stretched, and James's gaze flickered briefly to the doorway where Emma stood, hidden but watching. Her fear was palpable, her shoulders trembling with the knowledge that Thomas was so close, so determined to reclaim her. James didn't move, his gaze fixed firmly on Garrett. "You want her back? You'll have to go through me," he said, his voice dark and resolute. Thomas sneered, the tension in the air thick enough to cut with a knife. "I'll be back with the judge, and when I do, I'll make sure you regret this." He turned and motioned for his men to follow him, his eyes never leaving James's. "She belongs to me, Blackwood," he called over his shoulder, his voice dripping with menace. "And I always collect what's mine." As the sound of hooves faded into the distance, James stood frozen, his eyes trained on the spot where they had disappeared. Emma, still standing in the doorway, had gone pale. Her breath hitched, and she seemed on the verge of breaking down. "He's going to come back," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "He's going to try again." James turned to her, his expression hardening even further. "He won't find you here," he promised, his voice a quiet, dangerous vow. Emma's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't speak. She didn't need to. They both knew the threat was far from over. As James watched her, something deep within him shifted. This wasn't just about sheltering a woman from a cruel man anymore. It was about protecting someone who deserved so much more. He would not let Thomas Garrett take her. Not now, not ever. The storm outside seemed to reflect the turmoil in the room as the reality of their situation set in. They were trapped in a standoff, one that had only just begun. Emma's story had shattered his world in ways he hadn't expected, and as the hours passed, James knew he had to act fast. Garrett wasn't going to let this go, and whatever it took, James Blackwood would make sure that Emma never went back to him. The ranch, for all its isolation, would be a battleground. He had money, influence, and power. But Thomas Garrett had the law, and the only way to protect Emma was to make sure she wasn't forced to return to a life that nearly destroyed her. James couldn't promise her an easy life, but he could promise her this: she would never be alone again. With that promise firmly in mind, James turned toward the window, his mind already racing through options. The storm had passed, but the real fight was just beginning. The next morning, as the snow melted beneath the pale rays of the rising sun, Emma sat by the window in the guest room, watching the world outside, her thoughts as cold and tangled as the storm that had brought her here. She knew Thomas would be back. He had made it clear. The law was on his side, or so he claimed. But Emma wasn't sure she had the strength to face him again. For the first time in a long while, she felt something other than fear, a sense of security, of belonging, but that sense came with a heavy price. She had been running for so long, so desperately, that now the idea of staying in one place felt like another kind of trap. What kind of woman would she be if she accepted James's protection? Was she just exchanging one form of captivity for another? The heavy weight of these questions clouded her mind, making it hard to focus, harder still to breathe freely. It wasn't until James entered the room, his footsteps purposeful and calm, that Emma's turmoil was broken. He had come with a purpose, a decision, one that would change everything. "I've spoken to my lawyer," he began, his voice steady as always. "We can fight Thomas. Legally, we can bury him in paperwork for years, but it's not going to be fast. He has the law behind him, and he'll stop at nothing to get you back." Emma looked up at him, her heart hammering in her chest. "You don't understand," she said, her voice trembling. "Even if you win, I don't know if I can go on living like this. Like a prisoner. You're offering me protection, but it's not freedom. And what happens when the next man tries to own me? What happens when I don't have the strength to run again?" James was silent for a moment, his dark eyes softening as he looked at her. "I'm not asking you to be mine, Emma," he said quietly. "I'm asking you to be free. I'm offering you something that no one else will. No conditions, no strings. Protection. Peace. You can have a life here. A life where you can make choices, find your own way. And if that means you're never ready to take the next step, I'll respect that. I just want you to be safe. If you leave, it's your choice. But if you stay, it's your choice too. I'm not asking for anything in return except for you to know that you're not alone anymore." His words hung in the air between them like an unspoken promise. Emma's heart beat faster as she tried to process what he was saying. He wasn't asking for her love, not yet, but he was offering her something that she had never had, the chance to make her own decisions, to have her own life, her own voice. She had been alone for so long, and now, for the first time, someone was telling her she didn't have to be. But the weight of her past, the scars that ran deeper than the visible bruises, held her back. Could she trust James enough to give up the only way of life she knew? Even if it was tainted with abuse and fear? She had no answers. James's voice broke through her thoughts. "There's something I need to offer you. Something that could help you more than anything else right now." Emma looked at him, puzzled. "What do you mean?" James took a deep breath, his gaze unwavering as he spoke. "I've been thinking about this a lot, Emma. I want to offer you a legal protection, something that will make sure Thomas can never touch you again. I've talked to my lawyer, and there's a way we can make sure he can't claim you. I'm proposing a marriage." Emma's heart skipped a beat as her breath caught in her throat. A marriage? She couldn't even begin to process the thought. It was too much, too sudden. "A marriage?" she repeated, her voice a mix of disbelief and confusion. "You're asking me to marry you?" James nodded, his face set in determination. "Yes. Not for love. Not yet. But for protection. It will give you legal standing. It will sever any claim Thomas has over you. And it will give you the freedom to live here, to live your life. We can have separate rooms, separate lives, if that's what you need. I'm not asking for anything more than your safety and peace of mind. This is the only way we can ensure you'll never have to look over your shoulder again." Emma stared at him, her mind spinning. It was a solution, temporary, but it would work. And yet, there was something about it that made her want to run again, to escape from yet another man trying to control her fate. "Why would you do this?" she asked softly, her voice barely a whisper. "Why would you marry someone like me? I'm broken. I don't know how to be a wife. I don't know how to trust anyone anymore." James's expression softened, his voice gentle but firm. "I've been alone for too long, Emma. This house, this life, it's all been empty. I thought I could fill it with money, with work, with cattle. But the truth is, none of that matters. It's nothing without someone to share it with. I'm offering you something because I believe you deserve it. You don't deserve to be someone's property. You deserve the chance to be whole again, to choose your future, to have a real life." Emma closed her eyes, the weight of his words sinking in. Could she trust him? Could she believe that he wasn't just offering her a place to stay, but a real chance at something more? He wasn't asking her to love him. He wasn't asking for anything other than her choice. And for the first time in years, she realized that she had the power to make that choice. She looked at the photograph of her mother, the one she had carried with her all this time, and remembered the one thing her mother had told her before she died. "Never let a man own you, girl. Find someone who'll fight for you, not against you." James was offering her that fight. He was offering her a chance at something better, something she hadn't even dared to dream of. Slowly, cautiously, Emma nodded. "I don't know if I can ever be what you need," she said softly. "But I know that I can't keep running. I can't keep living in fear. So yes, yes, I'll stay. Yes, I'll marry you. But only if it's for my protection, for my freedom. I'm not ready for anything else." James's expression softened into something gentler, and he gave her a nod of understanding. "Then we'll take it slow. We'll do this on your terms, Emma. No pressure, just time." A sense of relief washed over Emma, a weight she hadn't realized was there lifting from her chest. She wasn't alone anymore, and for the first time in so long, she felt like she had a choice in the matter. It was a small step, but it was hers to take. Later that day, they gathered in the ranch's study for a simple ceremony, one with no grand promises of love, but only the solid foundation of protection. James stood before her, his voice steady as he spoke his vows. "I promise you won't be property. You're my equal, my partner, and I will protect you no matter what." Emma, her voice trembling but steady, spoke her own vows. "I promise to trust again, to try, even if I'm broken, to choose courage over fear." The ceremony was brief, but the weight of it was felt in every corner of the room. As James slid his mother's simple gold band onto her finger, Emma couldn't help but feel a flicker of something deep inside her, a tiny spark of hope. It wasn't love yet, but it was a promise that for once, she wasn't alone. And maybe, just maybe, she was on the path to healing. But before the ink on their marriage certificate had even dried, a cold wind blew through the door. The sound of hooves was heard in the distance. Thomas was coming back, and this time, he wouldn't go away so easily. 3 months had passed since Emma had taken the choice to stay at Blackwood Ranch. 3 months of tentative steps toward healing. And still, the shadows of her past clung to her like a second skin. The winds had changed in her life, but the scars, though fading in their physical form, still gnawed at the edges of her soul. Emma had become accustomed to the warmth of the ranch, the peaceful rhythm of the days, and the quiet companionship James offered, never pushing her for more than she was willing to give. He had been patient with her in ways she never imagined anyone could be, letting her heal at her own pace. She worked beside him, riding horses, organizing the ranch's books, and spending her days with Mrs. Chun, helping with the ranch's day-to-day operations. Emma had found something she hadn't known existed in her, a sense of purpose. She was no longer just a victim running from the past. She was starting to live again, starting to realize that perhaps there was more to life than fear. And yet, as the days passed, Emma knew that the peace she had fought so hard to find might be short-lived. Her mind could not forget the man who had terrorized her life for so long. Thomas Garrett had not let her go, and Emma could feel the weight of his presence hanging over her, like a dark cloud that would one day rain down on them all. James had tried to reassure her, telling her that Thomas would not find her here, but Emma knew better. She knew he wouldn't stop until he had her back, and she was not naive enough to believe that he had forgotten about her. It was late March when the attack came. The night had fallen silent, the air cool and still, with the promise of spring just beginning to show through the thinning snow. Emma sat by the fire in the guest room, the flickering light casting soft shadows on the walls, as she read a book she had found tucked away in the library. The house was quiet, peaceful, and for a brief moment, Emma allowed herself to believe that maybe the past could stay buried. But that illusion was shattered in an instant when the door to her room was thrown open. She didn't even have time to react before a hand clamped over her mouth, pulling her into the darkness. She struggled against the grip, her heart racing with the instinctive fear that flooded her veins. The smell of whiskey stung her nose, and a voice she knew all too well whispered coldly in her ear. "Did you really think I'd let you go, Emma? Did you think I wouldn't find you?" Thomas Garrett's voice was a low growl filled with venom. "You humiliated me, made me a laughingstock. You're mine, and I'll make sure you understand that." Emma's blood ran cold as she tried to scream, but her throat constricted with terror. Thomas's hand was firm over her mouth, and he dragged her out of the room, her body weak and disoriented as he pulled her through the hallways. She fought with everything she had, but the strength he had over her was overwhelming. Her legs buckled beneath her, and she was helpless to stop him. Her mind screamed for help, but her body was too weak to fight back. She heard footsteps echoing through the halls, muffled voices, but it was too late. She was already in his grasp. The last thing she remembered before everything went black was the cold, sharp smell of chloroform filling the air. Emma's world went dark. James had been out in the barn, checking on the calving cattle, when he returned to the house to find it eerily silent. At first, he thought nothing of it. After all, the ranch had been quiet for weeks, but as he stepped into the main house, a sense of dread settled over him. His heart skipped a beat when he saw the guest room door open, the room empty. He called out her name, his voice filled with tension, but there was no answer. Panic surged in his chest as he rushed through the house, searching for Emma. When he reached the kitchen, he found Mrs. Chun lying unconscious on the floor, her head bleeding from a blow to the back. He rushed to her side, his mind racing. What had happened? Where was Emma? His heart pounded in his chest as he lifted Mrs. Chun into his arms, his eyes scanning the floor for any sign of the woman who had become the center of his world. And that's when he saw it, a note, hastily scribbled, left on the kitchen table. She was always mine. Come alone to Devil's Canyon if you want her body back intact. The words hit him like a hammer. Thomas had taken Emma. He had dared to come for her, to drag her away from the safety of the ranch and into the heart of his madness. The note was a threat, but it was also a challenge. Thomas was daring him to come, and he would. James wasn't the kind of man to back down from a fight. Without hesitation, he called for his ranch hands and the foreman, instructing them to prepare for the worst. They would have no backup. This wasn't about law or order. This was about survival. The ranch hands would go with him, and they would make sure Thomas Garrett never laid a hand on Emma again. As they rode out into the night, James's mind was set on one thing: getting Emma back. Devil's Canyon was a treacherous ravine, known for its narrow, winding paths and sheer cliffs. It was a place where men went to hide and men went to die. It was the perfect place for a trap, but James wasn't afraid. He had made up his mind that no matter what, he was going to bring her back. They rode through the night, the horses' hooves pounding against the rocky ground as they made their way toward the canyon. The wind howled through the trees, and the moon hung high in the sky, casting an eerie light over the land. When they reached the canyon's edge, James saw him, Thomas Garrett, standing with Emma tied to a tree, a gun pressed to her head. "James Blackwood," Thomas called out, his voice filled with bitter hatred. "You're too late. She's mine, and you'll never take her from me." James's heart pounded as he dismounted, his eyes locking onto Thomas's. "Let her go," James demanded, his voice low and deadly. "You're not going to win this. You're done." Thomas's lips curled into a sneer. "You think you can stop me? You think you have the power to take her from me? You're just a rich man with a ranch, Blackwood. You don't understand the kind of power I have. She's mine, and I'll do whatever it takes to get her back." Emma, despite the terror in her eyes, lifted her chin defiantly. "I was never yours," she said, her voice shaking but strong. "You don't own me, Thomas. Not anymore." Thomas's face twisted with rage. "You're mine, and I'll make sure you understand that, Emma." As he raised his hand to strike her, James's rage erupted. He charged at Thomas, his fists flying as he tackled the man to the ground. The two men fought with brutal force, each blow landing with the sound of fury and hatred. James's hands were around Thomas's throat when he heard the gunfire. The hired guns had opened fire, but James's men were ready. The ranch hands had positioned themselves earlier, anticipating this moment, and they took the hired guns down with expert precision. James barely noticed the chaos as he focused solely on Thomas. The fight continued, the struggle between them fierce, and unrelenting. Thomas tried to push James off the cliff, but James wouldn't let him. With a final, brutal blow, James knocked Thomas to the ground, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He stood over the man, panting, and for a brief moment, he considered letting him fall. But something in him stopped. James reached down, grabbed Thomas by the collar, and pulled him back. "You're going to face justice," James said coldly, his voice as icy as the wind howling around them. "Not by my hand, but by the law." Thomas's eyes burned with fury, but he didn't resist. He was done. The marshal arrived shortly afterward, and Thomas was arrested. He was charged with kidnapping, attempted murder, and a litany of other crimes. Emma collapsed into James's arms as they made their way back to the ranch, the danger finally behind them. But even as they rode home, both knew this wasn't over. Thomas Garrett was a man who didn't give up easily, and the battle for Emma's freedom was far from finished. But for now, she was safe, and that was all that mattered. The days following the attack in Devil's Canyon were a blur of recovery, both physical and emotional. Emma's body healed quickly enough, the bruises and cuts fading under the careful care of Mrs. Chun. But her heart was a different story. She had been through so much in such a short time. The fight in the canyon, the sense of terror when Thomas had come back, it all weighed heavily on her. Yet through it all, James was there, steady, unwavering. He didn't expect her to be whole immediately, and his quiet presence was enough to keep her grounded. The days stretched into weeks, and Emma found herself spending more time with James, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. They worked side by side, riding horses, organizing the ranch, and taking care of the cattle. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Emma began to realize that something had shifted within her. She had come to Blackwood Ranch to escape a nightmare, but now she was starting to see something she hadn't even known she was missing: peace. In the quiet moments, like when she sat on the porch in the evenings, watching the sun dip behind the mountains, or when she laughed at Mrs. Chin's stories over dinner, Emma began to understand that this place was no longer just a shelter from her past. It was becoming a home. And James was becoming more than just the man who had saved her. He was becoming someone she cared for deeply, in ways that she hadn't allowed herself to care before. But despite the slow build of warmth between them, Emma still held back. She wasn't ready to give her heart so freely again. She was afraid. She was broken. How could anyone truly love someone like her? She still woke up in the middle of the night, haunted by nightmares of Thomas, of the life she had left behind. She would wake up gasping, her body drenched in sweat. And in those moments, James would be there. He didn't rush her. He didn't push her to talk. He just held her until the fear subsided, until she could breathe again. It was in those quiet moments, in the safety of his arms, that Emma realized how much she had come to rely on him, not just for protection, but for comfort. And yet, she couldn't shake the fear that she wasn't enough for him, that she would never be enough. She didn't know how to be the woman he deserved, not after everything she had endured. She wasn't the woman she used to be. She didn't know if she could ever be that person again. The emotional weight of her past still clung to her like a heavy cloak. It wasn't until one evening, as they sat together on the porch, watching the sunset, that Emma finally let herself speak her truth. The words came out slowly, each one a struggle, but they were finally out in the open. "James," she began, her voice quiet but steady, "I don't know if I can ever be the person you want me to be. I'm broken. I've been broken for so long, I don't even know how to fix it. I don't know how to love someone without fearing that they'll leave me, or worse, that I'll become like the person I was before." James turned to her, his expression softening. He took her hand gently, his thumb brushing over her knuckles in a soothing rhythm. "You don't have to be perfect, Emma. You don't have to be fixed. I don't want you to change for me." His words hit her like a wave. She looked up at him, her eyes wide with the vulnerability she had kept hidden for so long. "But how can you love me if I'm broken?" she whispered. "How can you love someone who's been through so much, who's so lost?" James's gaze never faltered as he leaned in slightly, his voice low and filled with sincerity. Because you're not lost, Emma. You're right here. You're exactly who you need to be. And I love you for who you are, broken pieces and all. I don't need you to be someone else. I need you to be yourself. Emma's heart ached at his words, but in a way she had never felt before. It was a good kind of ache. She felt seen, heard, and for the first time in her life, she realized that she didn't need to be perfect. She didn't need to hide her scars. They had shaped her, yes, but they didn't define her. And maybe, just maybe, she could start to heal. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Emma made a decision. She wasn't going to run anymore. She wasn't going to let fear control her life. She was going to stay, not out of obligation or fear of being alone, but because for the first time in her life, she wanted to be here with James. She wanted to learn to love again, to trust again, and to build a life she could be proud of. It wouldn't be easy. She knew that. Healing never was. But with James by her side, she felt like she could finally begin to rebuild. As they sat in comfortable silence, the quiet sound of the wind rustling the trees around them, Emma realized something else. She wasn't just healing because of James. She was healing because of herself, too. She was learning to forgive herself, to let go of the past that had held her captive for so long. It wasn't about forgetting, it was about moving forward. It was about choosing to live in the present, choosing to believe that there was still a future worth living. Days turned into weeks, and Emma's connection with James deepened. The ranch became her world, not just a place to hide, but a place where she could create new memories, where she could feel at home. They still had their struggles, their silent battles with the past, but they fought them together. They grew together. It wasn't always easy, but it was real. And in those moments of quiet, of shared glances, of moments when the world seemed to fade away, Emma knew that she was exactly where she needed to be. The bond between them grew, and one day, as they sat together in the garden, James turned to her with a smile that reached his eyes, something soft and full of warmth. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice low and gentle. "Maybe it's time we make this official. No more fear, no more waiting. Let's make this life together, Emma. You and me. No more holding back." Emma looked at him, her heart swelling with a mixture of emotion she couldn't quite name. She had feared love for so long, but now, in this moment, she realized that love was not a burden or a cage. It was freedom. It was healing. It was the choice to live, to move forward, and to build a life together. She smiled, her eyes softening as she looked at the man who had become her anchor. "Yes," she said quietly, her voice trembling with emotion. "I choose you, not out of fear, not for protection, but because I love you, James." And as the sun set that evening, casting a golden glow over the ranch, James pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her as they stood there together, ready to face whatever the future held. The past had tried to break them both, but they had survived it. And now, together, they would build a future that was theirs, free from fear, free from the shadows that had once haunted them. The night was still and peaceful, and for the first time in her life, Emma knew that she had found her home. It wasn't just a place. It was a feeling. It was James. It was love. And it was enough.